Okay, welcome back everyone. This is the last session of a very exhilarating and intriguing 3 days, I think, and it's going to be a challenge to recapitulate 3 days in an hour, but we will try, and I'll ask everyone around me to do their part by being brief, conscious, use your self-awareness and your mindfulness to be brief in your answers, because there's a lot of people and we want to hear from everyone. And so we're going to have a couple of questions that essentially come from the Geshes as summarizing a general concern or issue that will be open for any of the panelists, scientists to respond to. And then I'm going to ask the presenters to give their own sort of version of what they think happened and what the next step might be. But let me start with the two questions that are sort of summary questions from all the input of the Geshes. What is the most important goal that has been so far achieved in this dialogue between science and Buddhism? And what do you expect to achieve in the future? So, like I said, anyone can take any piece of this, so it's your own perspective, of course. And some people have been part of the dialogue for longer than others, so it's, of course, it's what you've seen so far and how you imagine it might play out in the future. So that's open to anyone. Somebody has to be first.
So, the important goal is sharing both ways. Buddhism has over 1,000 years of thinking about the meaning of the words and probing the mind. And science the young upstart science has 400 years of probing the physical world. And as we noted in the conference, science has one of its limits in quantum mechanics. As we probe the very small, we run into particles that behave as waves and waves that behave as particles. And when we begin to ask questions of those particles and waves, to do experiments with them, it seems like the question we ask, the consciousness of the observer, the doing of the experiment, interacts with the experiment. And we're on the verge of trying to understand how that can be. And I believe that with this long tradition of Buddhist thought, it might give us some guidance as to how to go about thinking about doing those experiments. And the other important thing from Tibetan medicine, which was, as you try to improve humanity, make it a joyful thing and don't forget to smile. I like that.
Okay, thanks. That's a good start. And a good model for an answer.
Well, I think Paul is one of the people with the most experience with this dialogue, and I'm the one with the least, so I'm probably a good person to follow him. As a Western scientist, I am a methodologist, not a theoretician. So what excites me most about this dialogue is learning new techniques from the Buddhist scholars. The long tradition of technology in meditation and introspection, and just having a vocabulary for all these inner states that we have not begun to explore in the West. And I'm excited about the possibilities of taking some of these techniques and applying them in our Western settings. On a larger scale, though, what I think has been one of the biggest advantages, biggest benefits from this collaboration is a change in attitudes on both sides. I know as a Western scientist, a lot of Westerners feel that science and religion in general are enemies and cannot ever coexist peacefully. And I know from what His Holiness said yesterday that many of his advisors thought that it would be dangerous to introduce science into Buddhist training. And I think what we're seeing here is that there's really a lot more we have in common, and there's a lot more we can do to help each other, and we don't have to be on opposite sides, but we can collaborate in helping enhance our scope of knowledge, enhance our ability to help mankind.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what the very concrete the concrete outcome of the interaction here of these programs here in Dharamsala between the scientists and the Tibetan monastics, the community. But I think that there are two. One of them is the changed attitude among the monastics themselves with regard to the science education itself, whether it is an important part of education, that whether it could be an important part of education for the monastic themselves. And I think that over 10, 11 years of the programs that, thanks to the Science for the Monks and the Science Meets Dharma and the recent program, Emerging by Science Institute, I think it seems like that changed attitude is certainly there. With regard to where we go from here is how the next phase is really implementing it in the monastic curriculum itself. That is the goal of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is to bring the science into the core curriculum in the monastic education. So that's the kind of the next goal. But I think that the larger kind of dialogue that has been taking place between the scientists and the contemplatives over the last 20, 25 years or so, ever since the first Mind and Life conference in '87 that His Holiness initiated, you can see at the one of the really impressive outcome of these dialogues have been, now there is a field called the contemplative science. That this is it's a real kind of the one of the real areas in the academia, and in fact, that in next April, there is going to be a first conference of the contemplative science in Denver, Colorado, which is, which when you look at like in the short period of 25 years or so, it's a tremendous outcome. Now, then, what is the next phase for such contemplative, this from this interaction on that larger scale is, I think that the some form of academic program that would teach what His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls secular ethics, which he has emphasized for many years. But I think that's where it needs to go in order to make a real contribution to the larger community by changing the very culture of the people's mindset, that because ethics is the key, the ethical kind of engagement is a key for the harmony and the well-being of the society at large.
I'm going to try to expand the question just a tiny bit, in that I want to include not just Buddhism, but the other Indian philosophical and religious traditions. And I think I want to answer the question maybe at three levels. So at the bottommost level, which already is very important, is now the increasing recognition that ideas from these traditions have as much to say about how mind and consciousness and things that are at the forefront of current scientific research are to be investigated. And that if new insights are to come from these traditions, it might overturn the way that this particular mind science is done. But even more, I think, dramatic would be to take things that are at the foundations of science. So the mind sciences are a relatively small corner, right? So physics, in some ways, is considered the most fundamental science, and maybe mathematics is seen as fundamental as physics is. And one possibility is that even our ideas of what mathematics and physics are will change because of insights that we get from these traditions. So to give you just a quick example, Geshe Laktor and I, we were talking yesterday that we think of mathematics as just bedrock. 2 + 2 is always 4. But maybe that's just conventional reality, right? And if that was the case, then the entire foundations of science have to be rethought. So these are the kind of radical experiments that can be done in how science itself is to be understood. And partly because when we say science, really it has a specific history in the Western world. And it may not have, if science had developed, the East, in the East, it might have taken a different shape. So these are questions that we can now begin to ask because of this kind of dialogue. But I think the most important effect, I would say, is that the distinction between is and ought, which is so central to modern science, if we can see that that is actually a false distinction, that the way the world ought to be and the way the world is are not that different from each other. And of course, for these contemplative traditions, that's central, because reality is not just the way the world is, but also the way the world ought to be. That's mine.
So yung chogi kogam nang tu che shui angara nidong gunia de series sabjong dos chen nyam shu che kogam rason ndin zan de lo shiring de nyamyong le pa ne dos chen samju shuina ane tanda dos chen toleng choya de pendo kar yong dos chen dos tiwa le yong yore din zan tanda gi she losan tin zin la gi so na jire ngara chidang manzo mijiya duzum nawe kabla ya chi tambo de mi pajo dang tsuju ni ngödo ji chagore ane mi pajo dang tsuju ni gi samzu dylenji kogab ji yongore an chungzan sheba ina ngarzo taza nangla ya chi ngaranzo nalo la chi kabre chik tu ma tu betone yang rimbu chi kan ne de gore ta de saja chi kan la ya chomang bu ni ya zum yon de pena manzo danda de na la ya saja kan yin ene pe risu ma je be da gin de mang bu chi du zum yon de ene nalo la ya chi te chi so che go nam zum kan de ma de se wo cha du gore ene te da risu be de ne ta chi ge ene chiri kyon gela na be gi chi lobdi na ya de zong an zo la ya 지 체리 돌아야 고도 배용도 삼바 아니 나란주기 낭주기 심하데 띵사브서브드야 페나 페준다 위슈에 나간주 페나 아니 메도 통고도 세야지 남주 간주 미기 넘버 10에 메도 도고도 신도 딘데시 당간주 숨겨래 당간 단다 딜 세로 가르도스라나 아니 메도디 toya de tanda tsiri sunda chabaina de wepo wege gulamne dosiniya miwa page tagil te and tagil dos levan ya dos de sama nizu pezun di chibu chamji da chi manzo ya khodo de sabr dreji dugi yore di imba insa kindum ba ne tsiri jango de shiragi kechimbu tong dosine ngara nyamyol dan de ji shuya yin shin tushina.
I thank you for the opportunity. And so just to say a few words about this question. And I have been participating in this monastic science education program for past 4 years. And based on my experience, I think that there are many things that we can gain from this kind of dialogue. And whenever we have this kind of dialogues, it gives us an opportunity to meet together and share our knowledge. And not to talk about the Buddhist community and the scientific community alone, but this kind of programs give us an opportunity to meet among our Buddhist colleagues because normally we belong to different traditions in Tibetan Buddhism and we tend to live in our own monasteries and we don't have much opportunity to meet with each other and share our knowledge and wisdom. And this kind of program gave me an opportunity to share my idea with other Tibetan Buddhist colleagues. And Another thing is that, like, in Buddhism, we have a profound knowledge or the description about how the objective world is viewed by the subjective mind. And when we talk about looking at a flower, or, for example, normally it was said that, like, your consciousness or the eye consciousness is engaging with the flower, and or eye consciousness sees the flower, and there's no much detailed descriptions more than this. And when we listen from our science teachers about the scientific description part, like how light is fall on this flower and how light is reflected from these flowers and then goes to our eye and retina and then to the visual cortex, and then how brain processes the whole image. This kind of description enhances our own knowledge about that particular field of knowledge. And so there are many ways. This is just an example, and there are many ways that we can gain from the scientific community, and hope that, like, it is same for the scientific community also.
Okay, thanks. And I would echo the sentiment behind that monastics and the scientists share something. We both sometimes need to get out a bit more, I mean, scientists can be monastic in their own way, and each side coming out and looking at the world in a new way illuminates the perspective you have on your own, what you're familiar with, and I know that's true for me as a scientist. Well, to continue and answer the question, for me, sort of related a little to what Paul said, in the West, and in our realm of professional science, many people adhere to the view of Stephen Jay Gould, the late Stephen Jay Gould, who said that science and religion were non-overlapping magisteria, that even if you avoid some of the worst culture wars and conflict you might read about in the United States, that they have little to say to each other and little they should say to each other. And that's fine, but it ignores the fundamental fact that, faith and reason coexist in human beings all over the world. So that's cleaving humans in an unnatural way. So for me, the fact that the dialogue works, is fruitful, is rich, is invigorating and inspiring to each side and the practitioners, and makes them look at their own fields in a new way, is the biggest achievement so far. And to me, the next step is, yes, it's got to be implementation. I mean, we may hope for some of these grand advances of a general theory of neuroscience, but it probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. So in the meantime, we have to chip away perhaps at the surety of some Western science communities that their paradigm is all they need to make progress, when manifestly they're not explaining everything, so they have no complete explanation, no perfect theory, and find ways forward to increase the sort of landscape of overlap and collaboration in scientific experiments, in visits and exchanges. And I think we've laid the groundwork for that, and this dialogue for now more than a decade shows that it can be done. Anyone else on this first question?
All the great scholars and my colleagues, venerables, it's a great pleasure and great opportunity to be the part of this conference and dialogue. I think in past 2 days, and today half of the day, I've listened to great scholars from all the different fields, from the field of neuroscience, from the field of cosmology, from the field of kind of theoretical science, physics, and from the field of experimental physics, and from the field of very specific research kind of department, doing research in the field of the rebirth and very specific type, and then also, of course, from the field of Tibetan medicine. If I personally, privately, try to access these literatures in these fields, definitely I may need to use probably half a year. And then even after that, I will definitely end up in not getting such a kind of valuable and essential informations. Those were kind of served, those were provided in all these couple of days. So it's a kind of one of unprecedented experience and occasion in my life to be in such a kind of environment. And I feel I learned a lot in a couple of days, more than I could have learned in past many years, though I access few of the books from time to time. At the same time, I remember the last two words from your book. Probably you may not remember that. Science and the culture and the spirituality and the religion is a creation of the human being. And each of these have its own beauties. And we are sharing these beauties. And we need to be kind of open to see the beauty in different field of studies, different field of kind of thoughts, and all those things. So I believe that all of my colleagues joining here are very open-minded people from all the different fields. There could be a lot of kind of hardliner scientists who may never kind of accept to be kind of present in such kind of a conference and dialogue. So I do really appreciate your openness. That is something I really respect from the depth of my heart. And at the same time, in future, I think it's very important to have similar dialogues as much as possible with participation of more and more monastic scholars and more and more other open-minded kind of scholars and academics in the field of various different types of sciences. There could be other varieties of science, field of sciences, which are left over in today's dialogue. I think it is very important to include them too. And of course, as Dr. Rangan has suggested, it's very important to include other kind of contemplative traditions too. Because after all, it's a learning process. We can learn from anywhere. We can even learn from a kid. So why cannot we learn from any other contemplative tradition? It should always remain open. So I think we have to be very open in kind of these kind of organizing these kind of dialogues and then conferences in the future. And I hope really kind of respectable organizers, Dr. Bryce Johnson and Venerable Geshe Khagdurla, the director of the LTWA, the library, will definitely take in consideration about what my colleagues have suggested, and we request you to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, that's a really nice sentiment, and I would say, yes, I think we have a message to expand the conversation. We've heard earlier that it would be nice to have women more involved. There are fields that I think illuminate many areas that we've been talking about, such as philosophy, which are not truly represented. There are other meditative traditions. So yes, the conversation can be expanded. A danger is only if it becomes a little too closed loop. We just stay in a comfortable circle of the people who are familiar with these dialogues. Let me make a segue to the second question, but before the second question, I'm going to ask for anyone, it could be everyone if they want, but anyone who wants to, I'm going to ask you to do a consciously very short thing, sound bite, to say what's the single most interesting, important, surprising thing you learned in the last 2.5 days. The floor is open for that. Short, few sentences. The thing that strikes you, just off the top of your head, obviously.
I learned a little bit about the black hole from dear Professor Paul, and I also learned something about the neutrons and the quarks and all those things. And then beside that, I learned a lot of things. So those are really very exciting things that I learned. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Anybody?
In one sentence, although the Buddhist philosophy and the scientific philosophy start with very different assumptions, I've learned how similar they are in the sense that their methodology is both the same of looking at an assumption and then testing it out, not assuming that it's true, but trying it out to see whether it works.
Anyone else?
I've learned that from Dr. Bruce about how they are taking very seriously to try to find out mind out of brain, mind outside of the brain. Another thing is I was very interested with Dr. His presentation that the Ravindraji, the recurrent corresponding that thalamic cortical information, which, well, usually I'm a little bit interested in thalamic cortical, so thank you very much for that.
So I'll go next because it relates to yours. The thing that struck me the most, because it's present in the Buddhist tradition and empirically from Bruce's talk, is, it's a game changer if a mind doesn't need a brain. In my field, it changes everything about the search for life in the universe. We were looking for our keys under the lamp because that's where we can look for our keys. We look for planets around stars and life forms on planets that are like us. But if mind and consciousness and intelligence doesn't need a brain, then we don't really know what we're doing.
아니 개인하게 거든지 땀주시나야 때문에 나서 사가다 칠로비 같이 짜친부 여바이네 알아 레바 춘지도 제와이 주시 칠로 가도 텔레바도 제와이 주시네 띵가 빼나 갈로라 나도 쇼종서제.
The one thing that struck me most was the cartoon related with the powers of 10 that is shown in David's presentation.
Yeah, Simpson's rule.
I literally learned something from every presenter, needless to say. But one thing that really struck me was Dr. Rajendra's presentation on how the meditative states can have an effect on the sleeping pattern, and in turn, how such change in the sleeping pattern can then affect health. That you can have an impact on your health and well-being. That one was a new insight for me, and I'd really like to learn a little bit more about that. Thank you.
I was most impressed by the way that the monastic graduates learn. I have never met a group that is so present while learning and takes such an active role in questioning and arguing. It's an active learning that I wish I could bring back with me and spread around to American institutions of learning. And as in most meetings like this, some of the most valuable and wonderful conversations happened not up here on the stage, but sitting around a dinner table or sitting in a chair side by side and sharing ideas just with a few people. So I remind the conference presenters that they provided us with a great set of opportunities to do that this time. I'd love to see that continue, and I thank the monastic graduates for educating me about new ways to learn.
I mean, I got to echo that, since I hope to write a book on that particular topic, but having taught in the workshops and had some conversations at this meeting, I would like somehow to bring the 22 million undergraduates in the United States at colleges and universities to be flies on the wall to see what happens in the classroom here with you. And then say, go back, do this, do your best, try and do this, and laugh more. Any other?
Actually, just a segue from what you just said at the very end, and on a half serious note, the thing that I have at least liked the most was that the monks have a great sense of humor. And even when we don't understand what they're saying, it's good. It's great to see that people are cracking up, both on stage and outside.
And also, just in line with those comments, as another university teacher, really echoing, learning deeply from the enthusiasm for learning among all of you, especially from folks that have had no previous exposure to science. I mean, had no kind of investment already in learning more about something that one already knew about, and to see the enthusiasm and openness displayed continuously all the time was it's remarkable, and I totally agree. I'd like to bring all of the students in America here to witness this.
Any more for the quick response and the thing they learned that surprised them the most? Because otherwise we'll move to the second question. Okay. And the second question really gets back to the title of this panel, which is Serving Humanity. So I'll read the second question and then I'll sort of crystallize it with a little more focus in the second part. We didn't solve the problems we hoped to be solved by development of science and technology. What should be our future directions for solving the problems we face? And that's kind of a huge question, so let me give it a slightly tighter focus on what we've been here for, and ask anyone to respond on the question of how we take the things we've learned and talked about and give them an application that benefits humanity, that improves people's wellness or state of being or illuminates their lives in some way. Again, it's quite a challenging goal, but it should be a goal of this dialogue. Anyone can take that on. So really, it's the next step for this dialogue, in as much as it leads to applications and tangible effects and benefits. Yeah, I know it's a tough one, isn't it? Well, okay, I'll start then. So since I've just laid it out there. Okay, well, first of all, I don't think we don't have to be too despairing about science and technology. I mean, I will just make a couple of comments on that score. I don't think it's a negative, positive thing. The failures of the materialist, reductionist view of science have been clearly on display in the last 3 days. However, science and technology in the last century have raised 1.5 billion people out of poverty and improved lifespans by 20 years. That is a phenomenal impact on the human race. There's no reason we can't feed a planet with 7 billion people. So, the landscape is not bleak in that regard. The failures are there, but they don't overwhelm the successes. As far as taking this in the direction of benefit, it's far from my field, but I've seen very clearly the ways in which the illumination of the boundaries of the Western view of these scientific fields leads to new insights and new ways of thinking. And even without the revolution that would accompany a paradigm shift with a true theory of neuroscience akin to our fundamental theories of physics, it's clear that there are ways which we can improve wellness. I mean, Bruce alluded to some very profound ones, and we've heard some more this morning. So there are ways in which using the information that is, a landscape that the Buddhist tradition has experienced for centuries, and the ideas go back millennia, bringing those into the Western realm of medicine it just seems like an obvious way to improve lives. And of course, bringing those philosophical ideas into the Western way of doing science, it opens up the box on Western science and leads to the possibility of better theories in places where basically we're stuck. So that's what I would see as our possibilities.
That ngadi tabali tanda lojon dinde ra de that koba tema tamunda waji tine ngara mgele ji nanjuk ton ma gegen ra ji chegyo ti indule tare taba yama te ge tundin ra waji le nanju ton ne na ma hye ya le ji sozo pege dincho chimbi ko ne hye toya ji da sege hye toya tinde ge ni da mambo ji ra so tine tanda kase jarum ji taba pe ne tine sun dule te ge ji tseri nga랑 tsiri jang ge ba de jajong kar yo ma ti sewon ra ja ko son tine nga랑 nanju chena jin tsiri ba le ta dang de tsiri ba se de le ji so so ta nian ra da tine ju ben jong ra bo tine ji ge che do le pe ge ngo bo sa chung she de zo da tine ra ji tong zu yo ina ya darin da ba tine gyalan na ba ni zu ben tine kewa na ba je on de le sa no ko yang bo ji da pe ge le ji ri ba yang da ge ko ni je sun zhang ne 지 준생 회사 여바 던지 통송 던지 인도에 나랑 단다티 게힐라도 라제 디네 고 로바 단다 제 다타베이스 제 코나바니는 던지 따레 고가 나한테 투지 제 휴저다 마음바나 문투네 디네 고가 던지 나투비나 제리나레 산노 고양보 비게 응위니 네단 가렌도 디토레 힌두세네 준생한다데 뎀바진 누나 디 제선랑엔지 여바등에 단다하 고소 마음바나 문투니 디 자체르 첸 로그 산팅도 말아서 남빙원이 시비나야 유노 마음보지나네 디니 리바양다 제순랑구레스 니 카시질레 디니 예치기 롱라 땡고사 송여데 대양 양터투비나 리바양다 투고사 송여레 디인들레 참말로 리바양다 제순랑니 기바지상레야 디인들레 리바양다 제순랑구 요나 바사디길 바용레 디인들레 단다 데 치린 카완치게 디니 단다 진데 차상데 디니 베 완전 치리 던데 거네 이렇게 제토요 말이스 이나야 당가 펜수상 고드만 시네 던데 돈에 다 차상 디 돈에 이렇게 제토야게 레와 요세 던데 송송 간디직 돈에 이렇게 제토비나 양으로 손에 비게 데비 되는데 가렌도나 드르투군도나 나라이나 던디직 제선란데 요 마도 네산수 디 인센데 틴체송 시야게 차기메디 인도레 마음바나 문투니 던데게 드니 당 나다버 시비나 소소 차키 레야레 마도 던데 차키 쪼야게 나라는 니바 가게메 디 인도레 던데게 차키 쪼야게 니바 요니 투손레 네단다 고간데 선네 드니 곰바 만치 예네 차키 쫀투야게 드니 타히 나로시에스 단다 마음바나 문투니 휴니 말만 로그라 되게 단다 자름 보지 그때 공이 사진 자체가 마음보지 요래 단단에 단다데 배 마음 받는 장리日本데 배 시대 때니 주토 받다 그게 희자 간리지나 일란도르기 지순라니 장토 받던데 지 공이 사모진 두산에 가서 말한 손한 대숑 대인들의 마음 받는 거로 손데 문투는 로트비나 된데 돌 펜도 쳔보지 요사레선 대전소다 데 저기 자 쳔보지는 상에데 담베인데 따들이 뒤수면 두더니 다란 인데 사마로 두지 제요야
I think it's related with first question, and before I joined this 1 month pilot workshop, I don't have any knowledge in science. This is first time I learned science, and I am a Buddhist teacher in my school. And so after attending this 1 month workshop and this 3-day conference, it there are many incidents or the knowledge that I gained from these conferences and this conference and this workshop strengthened my many of beliefs and the teachings that I teach in the monastery. And on another hand, before I came to this conference and this workshop, I have a belief or a view that the scientists are the kind of people that concerned only about material development and making money. And by listening to presenters and the teachers during the workshop, I came to realize that all the scientists are not like that. And there are ones who follow like empirical evidence and who try to find whatever they believe and whatever they do, they always give reason and empirical evidence as the highest authority or highest level. And so this is kind of important for us. So in the future, if through our collaboration or from the scientific research, if we can find any kind of theory or kind of any field of knowledge that is driven by reason and empirical evidence, then even if it goes against my past belief and traditions, I'm ready to follow the new path that is shown by reason and evidence. And also after attending this conference and workshop, it became clearer for me why His Holiness is always encouraging us to learn science. And so I'm not in a position to organize this kind of dialogues, but those people who are in a position to organize workshops and conference like this, I request them to continue this kind of programs, and especially Gisela and Bryce. We would like to thank all the presenters for having this program and presentation.
And I would note, actually, not to correct you at all, but that you are all the geshes in the program and all the graduates of the Science Leadership Program and all the students that have been through the Emory program after their training are indeed in a position to lead the dialogue themselves. That's part of the point. That's part of why we're doing this. Maybe the dialogue is small, maybe it's within the monastery with your young monks, or maybe it's outside in the community near your monastery, but you actually are, you're equipped to continue the dialogue. Any other comments on the second question?
I think this is a very important question of how will this dialogue help humanity, because I think it's a question that scientists have gotten out of the habit of asking. And I think one of the effects of this dialogue will be to remind scientists of why we are doing science. And when scientists have to apply for a research grant or a paper for publication, we have to justify our choice of research participants, our choice of methodologies, our procedure, our instruments, our measurements, our statistical analysis, how it relates to previous knowledge, but we're not asked, how will this make people happier? We just assume that any advance in knowledge will help humanity, and as Chris pointed out, it often does, but not always. And if we made it a part of every grant application to ask, how will this make people happier? That would change maybe the type of research we do or how we do our research. So I think we need to keep asking ourselves, how does this work really help humanity, and how can we change it so it'll do it better? Just asking the question is half the battle, I think.
Ngarang samja dawi taleng di toleng kabla chonang dabu chik ne shugo samsong nyama ngarang bayula peje tadu samba sem zambe shung tadu kabla nawa khare shago samna ta kharlo chirogi ngobo dang dinde shira nega shira megyo dabu chik sem dingone chash mo imbo dabu chik pena shungchi mixe tengemindu de ina shungi tsik de tandanga sarbo temwe chirogi ne sukme de rangi semne chiron nans ta di indu samba dinde kyang ngarang ani ta shung shambal ke shigme semzambe shung indu samba dinde rang sam tegyo ani ta penzo hange katin peshin penzo hange katin de gejela namaso katin chene ani sabjong chik charar kogap chik ras ani dele du samba sabjong lo tangbu di samloi wangzhen chende kabloi ngarangi dingwengi samlo de bet gyura devs sem di cha chum mewa che dile gyang cha sha sem di la tangzin chinge leba da bu chi yoba dende da bu chi yang samlo che kes dende da bu samlo che ke ani ta chi di ngarang so ani thangbu gi ani kharlo gore samlo di mewa so ya de kale khabu shira do di tandu nga halam masona ta leba di cha chum yimbi gi tes togba da bu chi kesong and dega nang sing ani ngarang so tanda sabjong parula ani tsendik dang ngarang so ani nambe tanda di parula ani Buddhist night sing ngarang so emori kapla di chi gore di kapla ni ngarang so toling chidu samba toling di sam kawa shagu yosana sem di kejel di sam shagu ngazugi ani nambe ngarang so tanda geshe dang ani khembu khona baso chi kandi sungdu samba sem la du samba halam tsendik begi tyo len kya mewa dochi dinde rabuchi ta toba rabuchi lengyo ani degana shingi sem diang e cha chimbuchi ya thungyo karsa dubyala an talen chongde dila karsa toleng dila samlo tandu samba ani tsenik ba mangbuchi ge marang jo sem diang halam nega chimbu imba rabuchi dang ke chimbu imba rabuchi dang yo gwaya rabuchi dang debi keje shido samba halam tsenik be sem ke maleng rabuchi ta dinde rabuchi cholo talen digi kalba alam sem ke lemba mase alam sem la khoran chogi nyamshi chaya rabuchi ngaran chornang yang dila ani ngaran cho ani khenrim buche gi songdang chedu samba talen ani chogdun tangbu gi gejela gi songdang chedu samba yang halam ma sona ani sem yoba di chik dubya gi ani tablam sangbu da buche mangbu songna song ani degana chik ngaran cho ani di mai be ani tsenik shamba nam gi yang halam ma songna chik karsa sem gi ani nyamship che shamba da buche dang yang sem di yoba da buche dang and degana khazi nyechan ngaran so David Presti khonggi ani ngonjo phas sabjong gi kapla yang khonggi songna so ta ngaran so ani wangje tsenik di gi nangba nyamdo ani nangbe gi tserik nyamdo chik thungwa da buchi ta din nega di khaw thugu do san nangbe tserik la thumo mai bi gi ani sem sing ji ro sheba sing rola ta din do samba ani chik diang yimba che chik ngarang gi khare ngarang gerwe ne samlo dana chorwan le do samba sheba di dup thuba ina khare phen do gu do sana ngarang so gi ani kewanga chi sing ro budang le gyunde sing di le la bu chagi re sam gi do din do samba talent songdi dilani khazan ngecher nge chai person galla rajesh la keje tidu samba keje dinga lingme wala khongge halam chik ngone sem din nega shimbu da buchik dinde da busung tanga di talent di chona jong ani yang chik kharsa kher mo chana gejela chik kaza tiwa chik di kandi chik kharsa shugo samsong de tena tuze mewe onde kandi shwe rangna di chik shugo samsung ina chizu shuna diksare tande mewa ani yang chik chonang di changdu samba tuklo tobu kwaya ki keshimburi mba geshela sungiro di chona chung tushena.
So this is kind of my experience with learning science and Buddhism. When I was in Nepal in my monastery, and I was looking and studying the mind-only tracks, the Chitramanta tracks. At that time, like in that text, it has a lot of give emphasis on the mind, and says the mind is the only real thing, and everything that you see in the physical world is kind of illusion or the projection of your mind. And at that time, I thought that like money is the real thing, and there's no much value or not much reality related with the objective world. And then I came to Emory science workshop, and when I listened to the neuroscience classes, then it seems that like brain is more important than mind, and brain is the real thing, and mind is kind of a secondary thing. And even though normally like what you believe in the past is very difficult to give away or eliminate, but still when I listen to these neuroscience classes and science classes, my previous idea that like money is the only real thing slowly begin to kind of decline, and it becomes kind of a brain becomes the more significant part. And then after listening to the presentations during this conference, and especially like Bruce's presentation, it seems that now mind again is the most important thing, and there is a consciousness becomes the most important thing, and it is not only important, but there are like evidence to prove the existence of mind. And also like when I listen to Geshe-Nyingma's and the Khenrinpoche's presentations, they also talk about the existence of mind, and how this our mind and mental factors work, and we see the world through our mind and mental factors. So this is kind of my feeling or the experience related with a conference. And actually, I have a question for Geshe-la and Khenrinpoche, but maybe because of the time, I will ask this question later.
Okay, thanks for that perspective. I also feel that I had lost my mind and maybe have found it again. We should be wrapping up, but I would ask anyone else who has comment on the second question, serving humanity, particularly, if they want to speak.
Well, why we are learning science? Why science and Buddhism, or science and ancient culture conversation is important? Why we are doing that? What would be the result? That is very clear by His Holiness the Dalai Lama many times. So now our responsibility is, let's work on that path. So now what we should think is, how do we go on that? So I was suggesting them it would be good to make aware to the other monastic members who are not here. Thank you.
Tari Chodel de Japaji Tangur Chagita. Tindu Tano Wangza da Wangxie da Levachita Gol Kamina Indu Peji Bug Sorry Beshune Ditol Chikalgan Zamchik Tisha Geju Yuding Sorchi. Tinga Chua Shivchungs. There's a Manguch Tali in the or that there's sometimes. Dindu Tangaran, Tanda Pug Sorry, Wakalan Zamchik that Chikaso Tating in sea. They do can nezu mangus le do sik klinge zu e feg sorry with all toss to nana yang me dosum samsh dit den dirisha kaisna samji linge zu suye dida anzu di halam chikwa chayung do en nezu chik dal toss yama chik sungdang to ne khewa yu deng so shi kaisna beg sorry with the shekzil de zo nangbe chöre anzu karisha ne sem bo she da shen de nangbe kol Nangjul Matev Jing and Shea Yaman. Did the Inea Sugu Namcha on a never sum served that the gate Chendu, Peggy Yaji Missionary and the Casserture. And did I done the Chunga Namcha to get she was catch me in that. When Levena Chichiyama Kugudo Sidukane, Kuging over the Karitsi, Reserogic, package to Indukane, Pejiganzu did not sell young Dino. Dino D. Linget the metal toss Tunana. Catch me or some logic. Rob the Steve Nami, any Chavsing into Gannett to get level chat or some. And yet, that one's a one sheet that called ngobyo tone sungin du gane kuna sungin di shujik halevresha ga chwa ti jong ine da ya ji wangxie ga so de sheba da sem da le du ya dan da sheba da sem de chabu shuje je dan de mun ho de so tu tong de do ti za de ge di mental ni zu shida ya wo de ji tu sha to na sums. So in my own experience there's a lot of information that Tibetan medicine can share to such kind of conference, and especially like Buddhism and Tibetan medicines are almost the same when you explain about the like the consciousness and like so. It's very important. I think my suggestion is to study at least basic concept of Tibetan medicine.
On the second question particularly, anyone? Yeah. Okay, last word.
Okay. So, I mean, as His Holiness himself said yesterday, there's a need for a secular ethics, maybe that comes out of these dialogues. But I would say that actually we need to expand that a little bit. We need a kind of package. I mean, I'm thinking of a cognitive toolkit, right? Things that would, the basics of science, reasoning, ethics, that everybody needs to know to be a citizen in the 21st century. So something that is easy enough that everybody can know it, and it doesn't depend on culture, and it is a package that will help all of us, at least, even if we cannot address all the problems of the world, we may have a method by which we can arrive at a reasonable answer. So that's.
Thanks very much. That's a great thought, and I think a nice way for the last word in this session. So I thank everyone for their great participation, not just now, but in the last 2.5 days. And so on behalf of all the panelists and the presenters, I'd like to thank the hosts at the TCV and the gracious and attentive staff, so I think we should thank them. And I'd also like to thank the staff, of course, of the Tibetan Library, in particular the phenomenal translators, the ones you haven't seen so much of, the ones on stage.
Now, since you have finished all the tough jobs, questions and answers, I'm going to tell you a story, which is going to take 2 hours only. There was a monk at the time of the Buddha. One morning when he was meditating, he felt that the Buddha has taught on many topics and answered many questions. But there are a number of questions related to what is the origin of the universe, and whether the universe will come to an end, whether there is life after death, and so forth. So he felt, I must get all these answers from Buddha, and if he's unable to come up with all the answers, I will stop training under him. So he immediately got up and went straight to the Buddha and said the same thing. Then the Buddha said, first of all, I never told you to train under me or to be my student. Then indirectly he gave an answer by asking a question to him by saying, suppose if somebody shoots an arrow to you and you are struck with that arrow and you are bleeding, at that point what would you do? Will you take the arrow out and take the necessary medications? Or will you start asking all the philosophical questions? Who must have shot the arrow? Whether that person who shot the arrow has a mustache or not? How strong his arms may be? What are the bows and arrows made of? And are you going to say that unless I get all the related philosophical answers to these questions, I am not going to take any medical treatment? Will you say that, or will you take the medical treatment? Then the monk said, of course, it's a bleeding. There's a lot of pain. The first thing I'll do is take the medical treatment. So the Buddha said, exactly. Well, you can always ask all these questions, but what is important is don't turn your eye, don't turn a blind eye to the prevalent sufferings that we see in the whole world, the whole universe. So what I'm really trying to say is, Well, you can all ask these questions about the origin of universe and consciousness and everything. I mean, it's extremely important for us to not to turn a blind eye to the pervading sufferings that we see all around the world. And Buddha was talking about alleviating the sufferings of not of the Buddhist or not of the Tibetans, but he's talking about removing the sufferings of all sentient beings. And that, I think, is really the ultimate goal of His Holiness. How can we, through this kind of dialogue, contribute towards a holistic health of the body, health of the mind? So through this exploration and dialogue itself is a contribution. So don't think, this is useless. But what I'm saying is, if we have this clear understanding that our pursuit of knowledge is towards that goal, then we may become even more effective. So that's why in Buddhism, whatever you do, motivation is the key factor. You may be doing the same thing, but if you have the motivation for a certain purpose, then it will be much more different than doing the same thing with a different motivation. So I really don't want to take any more time, but 2-3 words to the monks in Tibetan. I would say that in Tibetan. Da gindiba so tanda gindiba paji chobji chuguchi kondeka chuksumne peri yore ene sabjong tashung ni phendo chung mangchaga tuksungdu tring songdula phendo chung mangbo songsu ene maongbala songdu diri chegoye da ta lechi de kechimbo yimbande sungdu me hidag gawchung ngazu dinde jig ta chungna samgi yore dinde jig ta khodoji sen samgi yore rawa ngazu gonde kha ga nal ta na thona chung tawa dige mangsha gonde kha ga tawa dige jo tawa da gibe hini dige da kembu du samlo ta me dinde mare ko khodo se mase se di sammal yungu du ko gab ra mara se di dinde judu ko gab je ra khodo je se ne ni phendo yoba je thong yung de ta phendo yoba de thong ne ta lamga digan roe di pyoji benzo kang jigbu gilenge mare 딩어도 상맥이 랭게래. 배는 어도 서로이나 배는 게 당부 희와이나 단등 어도 퇴바 망부 희우지 송도 소리에 sab중소에 망 타주지 지기열에 딜런 루승 코라 차샤와이나 데머리 유니버시티에 루승 톰나 디당기열에 세거 패밀리 파운데이션 루승 톰나 디당기열에 디 로다르 당기열에 다가나시 단더 템플턴 파운데이션 건 루승 다 송도 데당 다가나 루승 체다주지 나도게 이나 용조에 거라요 말에 저서 당기열에 this tang wala this tapki chen du gra ma do te ga sa ko yung ma ro ta ti tapki si lelo me do go mo jate ro lam ne lelo ye chan me do ti ngoy ne su di hyun ma do chi tu so yung ye la ta ngo ro ko che de chi ge ge number so yor da so mo pe na Emory University ge shilom san de ka le shibung ne jab ge yo ta na sing ro ko Bryce Johnson ne ta pe de lo chu khung ne ta pa de khona khona ge la fo de samla le ga me wa tu so de ge yor tu so de ka le jab ne mi gu chen mo ji ji ge yor tukchen ta ta dub de yor ma do ya nga lenge ran samlo na ma ina penzo khang gi legi de so pyoji ri hyung na tinde nyarza che re ro ta de de wa yor ro yor de tisamje gi ma je na do sin ro kha na ya iji mi ji de sang ma che de go ye cha ge me khang shi ro ta ina me 군대 그 공시에 살 tembe nga zo godo yor hingi yor ene tinde inde chu ma je na mande ken ji sha de yor ten che da nga do gindu gi puso ge ine tinde nga zo na ye de 군대 ge da sha de na ti do wa de chojo ge nyamle indas chojo ge nyamle chang indas ti yor dina tinde inde de nga zo ta simjin ji thanda sa nga zo mangbu lab gi yor ene nga zo phebe ne da chobo shibu ji cha de yor tinde chu de phebe ne da cha le sha wa ine jungmo ne da thombu ji ga le leb go ge na danda ne nga zo mi re ri ni re gi kale jab ne tinde lewe ji lebgere ma do ge te nyima khashe ji jami phene phar ji us kembe ji jab yang jam dinge de yana gasa khan le lebge mare ngazo da gasa khawa ga de do se na hye me ga de do wa penjor me ga de do wa ta tu dang la hyu jor da lebge mare wa o ti ju da ji ge tring sabjong da song du tu ben so se da mang bu do tinde za da ti tu le sha che ne yambe de ma je be che ne da na ba su ngo ne yang su su ngo ne da chen do yo na 가르토리나 힘들게 해요. 이제 매제 그 무망보지 그 송도 공부해 된데 말로 그 가르토리나 다 나버서 맞지는 고마서서 나리야 게 망보 튀는 거. 근데 근데 뭐 찍니 다 루무 챙겨 갈 순구도. 내가 그 희우 중서 나중에 마음발로 차로 가르쳐도 나게 순구도. 루무 챙 차로 나투 맞지 내수 가가래라 봐. 근데 이제 공부 코네 라와 코라 그 기다야 거로 오네. 다 나게 그 셰네 수멜 맞네 나버서 퉁된래 요래. 유디다 디 가르쳐 거다 간제디 야채서 찍는 것도 되 구조 마다나 나도 미치니 구조다나 구조 탭그 말해 어 근데 이제 나도 상맥이 고 레시데 캐침부직 시체네 잡조나로나스 ene pera ngato gondi kha na la nangbe chu ge lobjon jang de yakbo hiwjere de yakbo yina ya korang ge korju ngirwan ro dinge til tunjur che mato na chene ge adaptation sesh do wa de tunjur che mato na 소소 약고 희우제나 코리오도 독자시도 다가는 신도예지 루주 코라나 다가 요래 나 표현 안 해서 차가서로 와시도 땅도 디 잠블링 단냠도 뿡뿡냠심 루트위에 된다 소소 쳐다 리흉 디 여베토니 애니 잠블링이 강래 딩자라토와 고고여와 어디 라월다 망고지 고고도와 어딘데다 게 망고 슈고에면도 다 천된삼이라와 대시도에니 왕발라 시 냠로나 로나스 도슈에 so I was just saying few words to the monks which I don't have to translate, and I was simply asking them to extend all the possible cooperation to make this kind of program a success. So finally, I would really like to express my deepest appreciation to all the scholars, participants, because it is not only that you have come here and presented a talk or presented a paper, but it is your whole being that has come here with great openness, with a great wish to share everything that you have without personal egoism. In many of these conferences, we do see people who really want to just present a paper and make them famous. I've seen this on many occasions. And they don't show any concern about the time, just keeps on talking. I mean, there's so many, things happen like that. But here, really, it was almost like a gathering of the family, Everybody was really like, there was no protocol, there was no formality. Everybody was easy to talk anytime, any point of the time, and everybody was ready to share anything. And that is the greatness of this, conference. And the purpose of this conference, as His Holiness has highlighted in his book and in many of his speeches, the purpose of this is not to glorify Tibetan Buddhism or not to glorify science, but it is through this mutual sharing learning, how can we make our at least small contribution towards the betterment of whole mankind. Even if you don't want to talk about all sentient beings, at least how can we contribute towards the betterment of the mankind? So this is really, His Holiness has mentioned this in his book, that this engagement with the science is a kind of a spiritual commitment. So therefore, it is important for all of us who engage in this kind of activities to encourage ourselves very often and reflect and review what am I doing and in which direction I'm going, how through this kind of project I'm contributing towards the well-being of everybody, you see. So each of us has a responsibility and we are able to make a contribution in this way. So this is not a small thing, So therefore this is really a time to dedicate all the wonderful merit that we have earned. I'm sure that we have earned a lot of merit. So therefore let us, in the Buddhist way, dedicate all the merit that we have earned for the benefit of, all sentient beings and for the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama and many other great thinkers and leaders who has this vision to serve human beings and who are, dedicating their life for this kind of purposes. So I do not want to call by the names of each and every individual, but I would really like to once again thank wholeheartedly on behalf of Library of Tibetan Works and Archives and on behalf of the Tibetan community and Tibetan monks for your participation. And as was urged repeatedly that such kind of conferences should be organized again and again. Of course, this is very much dependent on Kunga Thundup. You know Kunga Thundup? This is a Tibetan term for money. So Kunga Thundup means an object where everybody is very attracted and which makes everybody successful. So if the money Kunga Thundup is forthcoming, this is another great facility. But even otherwise, we should try our best through our joint collaboration, how to organize this kind of conferences, or maybe doing this, the same thing in a different way to continue this kind of wonderful work. So I would like to now thank formally to all the teachers and also all the monks. So can you, this is the Tibetan tradition of offering khadak, which symbolizes long life and purity. I must not forget thanking all my library staffs. I'm really privileged to have wonderful, energetic team of staffs from the library who are responsible for all my success. They are videotaping, recording, making everything, photographing, whatever, translating everything. So I take the credit, you see, as we always do in all the institutions, the boss takes the credit, but the people who are working behind the scenes, they are indispensable people. And I must thank them. And then lastly, I would also like to thank the Tibetan Children's Village, those people who were serving the food, who were serving the tea, and then all the, and for arranging the stage and everything, I cannot, enumerate each and everything. So I would really like to thank all the TCB staffs who has been so generous and so kind. And then lastly, I would like to thank the observers also. Because in the absence of our observers, our talk will be of not much, not much meaning, you see. So it is because of you who stood firm with us in this cold weather, which also inspired us to continue this dialogue for 3 days. So thank you all.